My name is Chris Enroth. I'm a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, and I am based in Macomb, Illinois. So I like to tell people I reside on the belly of Illinois. And today we are going to be talking about invasive plants beyond what is outlawed. And in respect to the terms of invasive, we have to go over some definitions. Now, my colleague in the kicking off the spring series, Ken Johnson, he talked about some of these terms. And so he goes into much greater detail on what all of this is, where to find some of these lists of these different plants that are actually legally listed. So check that recording out at the Illinois Extension Horticulture YouTube channel. But just briefly, for our purposes, let's cover what do we mean by invasive. Now, when I use the term invasive, I'm really utilizing this as more of a legal or a term that has been created by the state government, federal government. So there is a little bit of weight on this term here when I say invasive. Now, I understand some people will say, that ajuga in my backyard, that is an invasive plant. How we use that term is very important. The ajuga, yes, that might be considered aggressive, but with the way that I utilize the term invasive, this is something that is legally listed as an invasive species. And so the Illinois Invasive Species Council has an actual definition that we can follow so that we're, with respect to particular ecosystems, any species that is not native to that ecosystem, which includes all of its parts, will, when introduced, will cause economic, environmental, or human harm. And so that is a legally defined invasive species. And we'll see examples of that today. Now, species of concern. This is also about non-native plants, and they have that potential for becoming invasive. And as we'll see today, they're already there, but we have not taken that step to list them as legally invasive. And we're going to cover all that stuff today. Yahoo! I bet you got some of these in your yard. So also, when it comes to some definitions, we have to also mention this, that there is a noxious weed law. It's on the books for the state of Illinois, for the federal government. Very similar circumstance, but this noxious weed is different than the Exotic Weed Act or that Illinois invasive species listing. So noxious weeds, these are weeds that are undesirable. These could be native plants. These are undesirable plants. Native, non-native, does not matter. Basically, it's causing physical or economic damage to our land or water resources. Now, way back when in the past, every county in Illinois used to have a noxious weed officer. They could actually go around and enforce this noxious weed law. But most counties have cut all that funding and that person doesn't exist. So, if you have Canadian thistle growing in your yard, way back when, there used to be an officer that could give you a ticket for that. It doesn't really exist anymore. So just want to keep that in mind, that when we talk invasive species, we are talking about a legal thing, but species of concern, not yet legally invasive. So we'll talk about that process. Because invasive species and species of concern, we find them all throughout the Illinois landscape, whether it's in our homes, our farmsteads, whether it's in downtown in the cities or in rural areas. They are all over the place. And so this is the point of this presentation, is to discuss some of these in particular species. And this list right here is just an example of some of those. Now, an example of invasive plants and species of concern, you might notice all of the plants listed here with the little asterisk by them. These are all plants that you can buy still at a home garden center. The ones without an asterisk, these are actually, I did make a mistake here. These would be considered legally invasive, except there is one plant without an asterisk here that's actually not on the Illinois list yet. Do you know what that is? I'll let you know. I just learned about this because I just assumed it would already be on the list, but it's tree of heaven. Not technically considered legally invasive in Illinois just yet. But the Illinois Invasive Species Council has been convening this year, and they've actually put together a list of plants that they would like to bring and advise some of the legislators on banning these plants, their sale of them. And those include calorie pear, Japanese barberry, but there's also some of those that you probably don't often find in a garden center that they are also wanting to make sure get listed as an invasive species. Tree of Heaven's one of those. Garlic mustard's one of those. Again, I thought these were already on the list, but they're not. So the ones that are outlined here in orange, these are the ones that we're going to focus on today. We could spend an entire day covering the multitudes of species that would be covered in a topic like this, but we only have time for just a handful, because I also want to talk about some of the control strategies here at the end of the class. Now, first, starting off, I want to start off with an example of a legally invasive species. Now, if you own woods or you have land here in Illinois, you're probably familiar with this plant, bush honeysuckle. It is actually a term that describes a kind of a whole family or whole grouping of honeysuckles. And these woody shrubs, they're pretty notorious here in the state of Illinois. It's very common to find them in woodlands here in the state. And pictured here on the right side of the screen, that all that green you see there on that forest floor, that is bush honeysuckle right there. Now, where I'm at in my neck of the woods here in the May 16th, bush honeysuckle is actually, it has been flowering for about a week and a half, and it's just starting to finish up. So what we see pictured there on the lower right side of the screen, that is the bush honeysuckle flowers. And that's them really in their prime full bloom. They do have an aroma. They do have a pleasant scent. And you can draw the line there. So at least here in central Illinois, where I'm located, we are just seeing the end of their flowering cycle. Southern Illinois has already finished flowering. Northern Illinois, they're probably just starting to bloom out right now, probably looking just like this as pictured right there. Now, this plant was originally recommended by Illinois Extension and the Soil and Water and NRCS and all that, because we wanted to utilize this plant as a wildlife or erosion control plant. So we were giving these bush honeysuckles out saying, hey, plant this all over your farms, put it in your yard as an ornamental. This is a great plant for wildlife and erosion control. And unfortunately, that did not carry on to be the case. So this plant does produce red berry in the fall, and that seed is distributed by birds readily. When it comes to the idea of food for birds, this is probably a whole other topic in and of itself, of which we should have an ornithologist here to really dive into this, but the quality of that food is debatable. When we look at some of the proteins and the carbohydrates carried within that seed, I've heard a lot of ornithologists describe it as more like junk food for birds and doesn't contain really that high quality, nutritious package in that berry there. Something to be mindful of. Yes, people will try to tout its ability to feed birds, but how well does it feed birds? According to the sources I've encountered, not that well. And how is it detrimental? It's detrimental by crowding out native species. And it pushes out native species. And where there used to be a diverse amount of species, there is now one species, bush honeysuckle. It is the one standing there at the end of it. And so this is a pretty tough plant, tolerant of sun or shade conditions. And easiest way to identify this one is that it is on a different clock than our native species. Bush honeysuckle comes from Asia, Eurasia, the other side of the planet, and it is used to a bit longer of a growing season. So here in North America, we see this as one of the first ones to leaf out in the spring and one of the last ones to drop its leaves in the fall. And this is really true for a lot of these non-native species that we're seeing spread out and invade our natural areas, is that they still have that internal time clock of where they originally came from on the other side of the planet. But when it comes to identification, if it's late fall and this is still green and all the trees have dropped their leaves, it's probably a bush honeysuckle or potentially a non-native. But there's other ways to help us identify that. Probably one of the more telltale signs. So when you're doing a highway survey, you are driving down the road 60 miles per hour or 45 or whatever that speed limit is. One way to identify this from a distance is it can develop these large arching multi-stemmed shrubs. So it's really that arching characteristic that's easy to see. And because of that low branching habit of that plant, actually creates kind of an issue with, say, a scrubland or a bird whose nesting habitat requires some type of brambly or shrubby type area. It actually branches even lower, which puts it in better reach of nest predators, raccoons, snakes, things like that. So again, that's not good for the birds. But one way that you can very easy to identify this is it has a hollow pith. And as that center chamber there pictured on that middle picture there on the screen there, the middle of that stem is hollow. And that's the pith, and it's hollowed out. Take a hand pruners, cut it. If all of these characteristics start lining up and it has that hollow chamber there, that's a good indication this is bush honeysuckle. It has very strong opposite leaf orientation. As you can see, that bright red fruit there, typically it's in pairs or in fours. We saw the flower pictures on the last screen there. So this shrub here is built a notorious nature. But we do have to be careful. There are native honeysuckles, though not very common. We do have some native honeysuckles here for North America. We do have our fly honeysuckle and our northern bush honeysuckle. Those are different genuses, but they really do fit that bill. Now, more than likely, are you going to have these in your yard? It is not likely, but it is possible. And one way to tell the difference is, for me, they have a solid pith. So when you take your pruners and you cut through the middle, that chamber in the middle, that's solid. There's no hollow area. The leaf margins also have fine leaf hairs on them. And the fruit, as we can see here on the right side, it's in this kind of elongated or more football-shaped capsule. And so that's the other thing. You can see these leaves right here. I'm going to flip backwards to see the leaves of the non-native bush honeysuckle. And in this picture right here, I like the way that I've heard this described. It's if you were making clay pottery, it's like someone pinched the tip of that leaf right there. And so that leaf tip is tapered there at the end, whereas our native honeysuckles, it's more rounded at the end. Doesn't have that pinched look there. All right, so that is an invasive species, but what about these species of concerns, these ones that we probably have in our yards? And I will admit, I do have some of these in my yard. And the first one here we're going to talk about is Callery pear. Now this, in my neck of the woods, is finished blooming, and but it's everywhere, and we are finding it everywhere, not only in people's yards, but also in natural areas. Now, Callery pear is a very popular landscaping tree. Probably know the more famous term or name for a Bradford pear, and that's been used since the early 1900s. And because you need another tree, another pear tree, in order to pollinate the flowers here, because the flowers on the one tree, they cannot pollinate each other. The way that these were sterile is that, like with Bradford pears, they were all clonally propagated. They were all made from cuttings of each other. So the genetics are identical. So you can plant as many of these as you want, as long as those genetics of those pear trees are identical, you're not going to create a viable seed or a viable fruit. But something changed as we got into the 70s and 80s. You probably heard about the shift in the term Bradford pear, and we're looking more at things like Cleveland pear, or there's other cultivar names that have come out. And that's because there were selections that were being made on a relatively few handful amounts of escaped Callery pears. And one in particular over in the Cleveland, Ohio area, where there was one growing near an interchange of a highway. And the way the story goes, I can't confirm the accuracy of this, but there were 3 nursery growers who would drive by this calorie pair, and each one of them remarked on the flowering, the branching structure, the fall color. And they all 3 took cuttings from this tree, unknowing that they were each doing this. And they all named it Cleveland Select, Cleveland this, the Cleveland that. And decades later, once they got these trees into production, genetics testing found that they all came from the same tree. But the genetics of this tree were so different from the old-fashioned calorie pears. Now we're getting viable fruit being produced on our ornamental pears. So that's what changed, is that over time, we eventually got enough genetic diversity within our calorie pears to produce viable fruit. Now, this is a picture taken outside of actually my office here in Macomb, Illinois. There's many things to comment about with this picture, namely the restoration area of which it is mowed for the most part, which makes it a very poor example of a restoration area. But all of these trees in this rocked area, we can see the fading white flowers there. They're tannish brown right now. Those are all calorie pears that have escaped into this ditch area here right outside my office. And we're really seeing them all over the place. And now, in terms of identification, it's a pear tree, which means it's also in the Rosaceae family. So the leaves themselves, they have that, I usually describe it as a rose-like appearance. It has the serrated edges. These leaves are very glossy, high gloss, and they have this, not necessarily thorns, but the sharp spurs on the branches that I see with a lot of escape calorie pears. Now, I say easy to identify, and that's usually only with those white flowers in the spring. Lately, when I've been coming across calorie pear in the woods, like deep in the woods, I just don't think my brain is quite trained enough to be able to identify it as readily, because I have been stumped a couple times only to realize what I'm looking at is an escaped calorie pear. Because it's important to look at all of the features of the plant. And in a wooded setting, sometimes that can be hard to do because these trees can grow fairly tall. And sometimes the leaves and the fruit, they can be out of reach. But they have glossy green leaves, burgundy fall color. It's got this small tan colored fruit. And so all of that will continue to hold true into as it escapes into our natural areas. Now, there's a lot of alternatives for something like calorie pear. And as I said, you can still go buy calorie pear, but because we see this escaping and crowding out a lot of our native species and creating that monoculture again in our wooded area, we would encourage you not to purchase something like calorie pear. And there's a ton of alternatives out there. Probably one of my favorite ones out there, pictured here on the right side of the screen, is white fringe tree. This is Chionanthus virginicus. It has lovely, lacy, delicate white flowers in the spring. Those flowers actually will turn into kind of a dark blue to black fruit that the birds will eat and consume in the early summer time frame. And then there is a little bit of a yellow fall color of this tree. It stays nice and good rounded form all in the habit. And again, here's a close-up picture here of white fringe tree. The flowers right there is a lovely tree. I really like it, but there's a lot of other ones out there. Flowering dogwood, it's an old landscape mainstay and still recommended tree out there. Serviceberry, redbud, some of our hawthorns also. Carolina silverbell, the pictured right here, these delicate little bell-shaped like flowers drooping down like this. Again, if you're thinking, I want some white flowered trees in my landscape, white fringe tree, silverbell. You could even go with the multitudes of cultivars of plum or crabapple. American hornbeam is another good understory tree, smoke tree, black gum, which is probably one of my favorites. And if I find a spot in my yard, I'm going to put a black gum there. And then yellowwood is another good one out there. So another one that I will admit to having in my yard is burning bush. Now, I didn't plant the burning bush. I bought the house and it was there. And it just so happens to be an excellent screening shrub from the neighbors. So before I can cut that down, I have to have another shrub ready to go to perform the job this one is doing. Now, Burning bush, popular landscape plant. I don't often know why, because it really can only do one thing, which is look red in the fall. So pictured on the left side of the screen here, that's burning bush, a big shrub in a landscape. Pictured on the right side of the screen, that is burning bush invading a local forest near my home. And so there's the red burning bush leaves and the green leaves in the background. That is, in fact, honeysuckle. Again, as I said, burning bush, it is a one-season plant. It has fall color. Nothing eats it. It's tough. It grows. It spreads. It makes it easy to propagate. So it's a landscaper's dream. In terms of identifying it, the trunk itself it's brown. Usually it's a multi-stemmed or multi-trunked shrub. It does produce fruit. I've seen fruit present. Actually, my large burning bush in my yard has many babies that live all around it. Where I go and I weed around my garden beds where the gutter drains, the birds or the wind will carry some of that fruit onto the roof. It'll land there, and I see burning bush seedlings coming into my gutters. In the woods behind my house, I am seeing burning bush sprouting up everywhere. Now, burning bush is a tough one to control. We'll get into control here a little bit later. So making me a little bit worried that, again, as burning bush spreads in, crowds out all those other native species, and I'm seeing fewer Mayapples. I'm not seeing any Virginia bluebells. All of the Dutchman's breeches are gone now, and a little bit worried. But probably the easiest way to identify this shrub is the winged stem. So Euonymus elatus, if we just translate that and flip the words around, translates to winged euonymus. It has these corky ridges here on the stems. Again, this is a highly popular landscape plant. I don't think I've ever lived in a house that doesn't have one, does not have a burning bush in the yard. And again, another name for it, winged euonymus. There's a lot of alternatives to this one, and I would argue alternatives that are more than just one season plants. What I have been experimenting with more is American hazelnut. I think this is an underutilized native shrub. Hopefully there'll be some more cultivars out there, but I have enjoyed growing American hazelnut in my yard. It's a little bit unruly, but it's been fun. And things like buttonbush, we'll see pictures of that. Hydrangeas, all of the hydrangeas out there, arborescens, paniculatas, and quercifolias, those are great alternatives to burning bush. And we look at ninebarks and fothergillas, sweet spire. Blueberries, we think of them as edible plants. They are making their way onto the scene of as ornamental plants. American cranberry bush, which is actually a viburnum, black haw viburnum, allspice. We even have our native version of the burning bush, which is known as Eastern Wahoo. And so that could be a potential alternative. Now, just putting some pictures to some names here. Pictured here, at least on that left side, those left side of the pictures, this is dwarf fothergilla. It has it has white flowers in the spring. So actually, we were just up in the DuPage County area just last week. These are in full bloom right now in northern Illinois. And the leaf color can vary depending on the cultivar. There are some that are bright green leaves. There's some that have a bluish tint to the leaves. But then they also have a fall color. Pictured here is a fothergilla on the lower side with a striking red fall color, but there's some that have like a bright yellow fall color. And then one of my favorites out there, buttonbush. I just love it because on the right side of the screen here, it has these, what do we call them? These Sputnik-like flower blooms here. Pollinators love them. It's something that you can plant in the full sun and soils with high moisture. And so maybe one of those areas where other plants might struggle. Buttonbush or Cephalanthus occidentalis, that is a fun shrub to grow. Japanese barberry. This is another one of those that is in everybody's landscape. I will admit to having this in the home I'm living in. This is one of those that I ripped out pretty immediately. But you can recognize it on the right side of the screen here. You see it everywhere. It has the little thorns on the plant, and it does develop that fruit, which is pictured here on the left side of the screen here. But Japanese barberry, probably more familiar with the purple-leafed version, but this is what it looks like when it invades forest. Now, when we talked with Chris Evans about some of the invasive species that he's worried about, this is one of them, because he said that we see these just invading high quality woodlands where a lot of the other invasive species, they don't show up. But all of a sudden, boom, here's Japanese barberry. One thing to also be mindful of is that, and I have come across this in the woods just behind my house, is that Japanese barberry, and again, as I mentioned, the variety you're familiar with is probably the purple leafed one, but the viable seed does not always produce purple leafed plants. A lot of times it will revert back to that green leafed Japanese barberry, because originally Japanese barberry had a green leaf. So that's very often what you'll encounter is a green leaf in the woods if an escaped Japanese barberry, not typically a purple leaf. And it took me, I'll say a second to figure that out. Boy, this sure does look a lot like barberry, but the leaves are green. And I had to take a picture. I had to go back. I had to do a bit more research. And lo and behold, it is Japanese barberry. It's just the seed, that purple leaf color did not carry through to the seed, and it grew a green leafed Japanese barberry. And just like our burning bush, we have tons of alternatives out there. So what I actually replaced my Japanese barberry with was hydrangea, little quickfire. It's a nice dwarf shrub. That's what's pictured there on the right side of the screen. And I absolutely loved that one. Easy to take care of, a good performer, nice compact form. And if all else fails, there's boxwood. I know there's people who love boxwood. There's people who hate boxwood. Boxwood is the bread and butter, though, of the landscape industry. When it comes to shrubs out there, I think this might be old data or old news, but boxwood is still one of the top selling plants out there. But hydrangeas are up and coming, and so are viburnums. There's also winterberry holly, one in particular that I know my colleague grows, Berry Poppins, I just like the name, had to include it in here. Inkberry holly, which is, again, this is a holly, but instead of red berries, it has dark black berries. And we also have our aronias, which we're going to see here in a second. Fothergillas, again, 9 barks. Grow a knockout rose instead of Japanese barberry. If you like the thorns and you want to keep the thorns but lose the Japanese barberry, just grow a rose. Dogwoods, red twig, yellow twig. I grow a gray dogwood in my own yard. It's a lovely plant, just about to flower. Birds eat the fruit that it produces. And of course, Weigelia, and I got to mention blueberry again. But here's an example of black chokeberry right here. So the top 2 pictures, these are the straight species, Aronia malacarpa. So as you can see, the far right, upper right picture, white flowers in the spring. Throughout the summer, the shrub has nice glossy leaves. It will develop a beautiful red fall color, and it'll have these dark berries that are excellent wildlife forage. Now, if this shrub, which probably on me would be a little bit over my head in terms of its height, that's too big for you. Remember, we're talking about barberry here, and some of these can be pretty small. They have developed dwarf versions of this black chokeberry. That's pictured on the 2 pictures on the bottom of the screen. So you can see on the left still has that fall color, still develops the berries, still has the white flowers there on the right side of the screen. That's black chokeberry. The name of that is called low scape mound. That is the cultivar name. And you can get the straight large black chokeberry species, or you can look at those dwarf cultivated versions right there, depending on what size will fit your yard. All right. That is an example of some of those species of concern. I would like to talk the rest of the limited time that we have about managing these plants. Now, when we look at this picture I took, I was standing in a creek. My boots were in the water. This is at Hornfield campus in Macomb, Illinois. It's the WIU's, it's their area where they use to teach students about conservation and recreation. On one side was an unmanaged slope. That's the left picture. The red is burning bush. The green is bush honeysuckle. On the right is where they manage that landscape, where they remove those invasive species. They didn't put any native seed down. This is just what came back naturally. As you can see, the woods are more open. There's more diversity here. And while this is unpublished, what they said is the sediment running off of this slope compared to the unmanaged slope was less. So even though We sold bush honeysuckle to help hold soil in place when nothing else can grow around it. That sheet erosion from that water running off that slope, it carries more sediment. And so just these key things. So you can make up your mind, which would you rather have? I know what I would rather have. And this is a personal decision for everyone to make. Now, how do you manage something like this? We can break it down into these 3 steps. Identify, so that we can properly manage these plants and develop a plan. We then go into our control step. There's lots of things to consider that we're going to talk about, and a lot of options. This never stops. And this is where you lose people. If I'm always going to have to fight invasive species, what's the point? We'll get to that. And then restore. We're stewarding in our native plants, and this is, again, an ongoing and never ends. A garden is never finished, and neither is a natural landscape. So here's an example. So step 1, we're going to correctly identify the invasive species. So in this example, we have bush honeysuckle there on the top, and we have garlic mustard here on the bottom. So now we develop our plan for how are we going to control them. So with garlic mustard, we look at mechanical removal for the most part. That's hand pulling. We want to focus on that for year 1 because we know that's going to be probably the most labor intensive, hand pulling out our garlic mustard. Year 2, we're going to start looking at removing honeysuckle and using both cutting it and treating it with an herbicide. We're going to begin replacement with natives. Maybe we need to abortive seed. Maybe we want to see what comes up. And we continue this control and restoration, all the while monitoring for regrowth. And so this, again, a never-ending process. And we're going to talk about chemical, mechanical, cultural, biological. What should you do? I try not to should on you, but I would say a combination of all of these is probably the most effective way of controlling invasive species. Now let's start with mechanical control. And when it comes to that garlic mustard, now here we are. It was a garlic mustard pull right here. Now the thing with garlic mustard is when you pull that up, the plant can still develop viable seed even when the roots are dried out and the plant is dying. So you got to bag it. So this is a garlic mustard pull right here. For the most part, this depends on the scale of what you're dealing with. So hand pulling is better really in those smaller areas like landscape beds or targeted natural spaces. If you're doing acres and acres, that's a whole other ball game here. So this is going to be useful for removing those young seedlings or saplings of maybe. I also, this time of year, will be pulling out honeysuckle. Baby honeysuckle, at least. Baby honeysuckle is very shallow rooted and something that can pull up very easily. And how often do you do it? As often as you can. Now, I think it was Archimedes that once said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. And with leverage, you can pull up anything. I think just the names of some of these devices are quite amusing. We have the polar bear, the uprooter, the extractigator. So I just like this, but these lever tools do exist to help in physically pulling out and removing some of these woody shrub species or small trees that might be coming into our landscapes and our natural areas. And these do exist, but I know that there's also a lot of conservation workers and people who deal a lot with this who say, yeah, but we're doing a lot of soil disturbance here. And a lot of times when we disturb the soil like this, we wind up getting more invasive species just coming in here. So a lot of times this is seen as quite disruptive in terms of the soil here. Not always recommended, but this is something that you can do with the lever. Now, I often will get this question, can I solarize spaces using things like plastic that traps heat and it will kill the seed or it'll kill the plant? And I will say this is a difficult thing to achieve. Solarization, at least in Illinois' neck of the woods and more central and northern Illinois, we just don't get hot enough. We don't get the amount of sunny days really required for this to be effective. And so this is a difficult thing, but maybe on a small scale, this could be effective. And pictured here, this is actually a research plot using soil solarization techniques in terms of trying to kill these plants. Now, what's pictured here is clear plastic. And again, in northern Illinois, I think what you'd be creating really is just a greenhouse, so a really nice place for the plants to grow. Maybe in far southern Illinois or the southern parts of the US, clear plastic would work, because the way clear plastic works is it lets the light move through, but when it hits the soil beneath it, that light energy changes to heat energy. And so you can get a lot of heat buildup with long sunny days and hot weather. So you can get a lot of heat buildup under that clear plastic. I think a lot of folks, maybe for northern and central Illinois, we could turn to maybe as a dark or a black plastic. And what that does is essentially just suffocates those plants. But again, this is really a small scale solution. This is really not going to be effective over a large scale area. And I argue we're using plastic, and if we can avoid introducing more plastic into our natural areas, that's probably a good thing. Then we have the mechanical control of mowing or cutting. Now, this is something that a lot of our herbaceous weeds, now pictured on the right side of the screen here, this is another one called teasel, which I see a lot of folks, it will grow in ditches and along the front areas there, along roadsides. People will mow this. The interesting thing about teasel is I've seen it flower at 6 inches tall. And so just something to be mindful of, that yes, sometimes mowing can help. Sometimes the plant is adapted to that and it will still flower, it'll still set seed. But mowing or cutting, if you're doing this for woody plants, eventually it will exhaust that root system. Now, how much energy is stored in that root system? It depends on the plant, depends on the species. You could be cutting the same plant years and years, and the minute those leaves come up and start photosynthesizing, it recoups that energy, and its process starts all over again. So mowing, cutting can be effective for some species, and I'll share a resource at the end of this presentation that shows you which was mowing work for this, what works for this particular species. This picture here is just an example. This is actually, again, my office here in Macomb. Now, if you can see in this aerial photograph, obviously we have the mowed area. So that helps to keep a lot of invasive species at bay, namely the woody invasive species. But if you can see the dark areas along the edge, that's all infested with bush honeysuckle. If we go a little bit deeper in the woods there on that upper left-hand corner of the screen, that is an area where honeysuckle has been controlled and removed. You see how much more light gets through? You see how more open that landscape is? That is more like our historical wooded areas from hundreds of years ago. It's these open oak hickory forests, at least here in central Illinois. And so just something to be mindful of, that in cases like this, and I can't even walk in the edge of these woods. The honeysuckle is so dense. What do you do in this case? What's the mechanical control here? And here's a picture of that. You see how dense that honeysuckle is? Yeah, you can't even walk in there. It is completely overrun with honeysuckle. And some of these are big. This is honeysuckle right here. That's a tree, essentially. What do? Really, only thing you can do is you need a big piece of equipment. This is a skid steer with a forestry mulching head attachment to it. And essentially what it comes through and it just chews up everything in its path. We're not doing anything else. We're just making it so that we can access this area. And then when it sprouts again, oftentimes you'll come back in, you might use a little bit of herbicide on some of those smaller sprouts. But sometimes this is the only option for folks. And as I mentioned, garlic mustard, we'd love to be able to compost it, but it will continue to develop seeds even after it's been pulled. So you can burn it, you can bag it and then put it out in the sun so that it bakes in the sun and is solarized, or you can eat it. There are some edible invasive plants. I would just ask that after eating, you make sure that you don't spread the seeds out into natural areas. So garlic mustard does make a delightful garlic pesto. Does it taste like garlic? All right, let's look at some cultural biological controls. Now, when it comes to plants like purple loosestrife, which is illegal to buy in Illinois, and I see sold every so often in Illinois, purple loosestrife, it invades wet areas. So they did release the purple loosestrife beetle, which also hails from its native range, to help in controlling that. This is not the most effective method in most cases, and I don't know how effective it has been in the long term, but essentially what they did is they released its natural predator. There's a lot to think about here. What else will this natural predator target here in North America? There's a lot of research and things that needs to go into before we start releasing stuff like this. Now, something that is popular, which I've seen you can even do on Amazon, is you can rent a goat to help graze or help eat some of our invasive species. This is a class in and of itself. There's a lot to think about here when it comes to utilizing grazing or livestock to help us control invasive plants. But goats are shown to be fairly effective at controlling invasive species. But there's, again, as I said, there's a lot to go through here. And at least here in Central Illinois, it takes a lot of work to keep a herd of goats from being attacked by coyotes. Also, the nutrition in these invasive plants does not fulfill their entire dietary needs. And so we have to supplementally feed them. So we got to manage an electric fence. We got to come in and feed them and make sure they're watered. And the goats have to stay within an acre for a long period of time to really be effective in controlling those plants and knocking them back down to the ground. But it can be done. This here is an experiment at Missouri State University where they were looking at controlling multiflora rose. Now, they utilized cattle on this plot here, more in the foreground, and the cattle controlled most plants, but they did not touch the multiflora rose. We have our control here in the middle, but when they combine goats and cattle, they noticed that the goats, they ate the multiflora rose and they controlled the invasive species on the site. So it can be done. But again, we're getting into raising livestock. That's a whole other world. Fire is something that is often recommended, and it can work for a lot of cases, but not all situations or areas. You probably can't do a controlled burn in downtown Springfield, though I've seen it. You've seen urban controlled burns before. It can happen. It removes all the vegetation present. It helps to promote some of our native species, but there are also some invasive species where fire comes through and it gives them a little boost too. So again, controlled burning, this is a whole class in of itself, maybe not a whole semester of classes in terms of controlled burns. All right, time for the one that usually draws some controversy, but we have to talk about herbicide because this is also an effective tool in the toolbox. And when it comes to using herbicides, it's important that we select the correct chemical, that we're following those labels in terms of reentry intervals, personal protective equipment, and it really is considered the most effective and resource efficient tool to treat invasive plants. I have talked to many people who said, I'll never spray an herbicide, and they buy some woodland, and within a year, they're buying herbicide because they realize the only way that I'm going to make a dent in some of these species to try to promote native habitat and native wildlife is using an herbicide. And so we're going to talk about ways maybe that we can do this that's not just broadcasting it all over the place. There's a lot of different ways that we can apply herbicide. Now, in some cases, we're doing a foliar application, which is a very low concentration of herbicide. We're just getting it on the leaves. Now, the one that I probably use the most is the cut surface, where we're actually cutting that calorie pear, that burning bush, or that Japanese barberry. We're cutting it just an inch or two above the soil line, and then we paint that with an herbicide, that stump. So that herbicide is only getting applied to that cut stump area. It's not getting applied to anything else. Then we have the hack and squirt method, which here someone has taken an axe and they've just hacked into this tree right here and they're squirting an herbicide. Drill and fill. Again, same thing. They just drill a hole and they fill that hole with an herbicide. These are highly targeted application things. Again, they're not broadcasting this all over the place. Highly controlled. And then finally, we have our basal bark. So this is something you spray on the bark. It actually penetrates the bark. This is an oil-based herbicide, and it will wind up killing that tree or shrub. There's a lot of options out there, and I'm sure there's more than just this, but these are the possibilities. And there are videos online Illinois Extension Forestry has produced that'll show you and walk you through each one of those. But let's talk about our foliar treatment. This is something that you would spray on the leaves. It's a very low concentration of active ingredient. This is best for small plants. I really say anything below the knee or maybe even below the ankle, making sure that, again, you're wearing proper PE, gloves, pants. Do not wear sandals. Make sure that you're wearing boots or something like that. Most effective just after full leaf expansion. This is true for plants because they've spent all of that energy expanding those leaves and maybe even flowering. Now they have to recoup that energy through photosynthesis. If we can hit them with a foliar herbicide, that really sets them back and can outright kill them. As I mentioned, cut surface or cut stump, this is the one I employ most of the time. You do, when you're treating woody plants, you have to treat them immediately because this wound can heal very quickly within 20 minutes. So this is really a 2, if not 3-person job. Someone's cutting, another person is pulling the debris away, third person comes in and treats that stump. Ideally, you want to do this not in the springtime or not in the late winter when sap is flowing. Best timing for this is going to be late summer into fall. And I've even seen this effective in the winter, early winter months. As you can see in this picture here, this is a large stump. And you don't have to treat the whole thing. The only thing you have to treat is going to be that outer tissue layer. And that's the only living part of that trunk right there that's moving photosynthates, carbohydrates, water, nutrients, all that stuff that's moving that stuff throughout the plant. So we just have to create that outer tissue layer, which is usually right behind the bark. And yes, add dye so that you know where you have been. This is a blue dye. For mine, you can go buy herbicide dye. You just douse it with a bunch of blue food coloring in my container that I'm using. In terms of chemical options, you'll go to the garden center and those shelves are just absolutely full. And I think it's very confusing. It can be difficult to make decisions, but let's break this down into 3 that I often see folks will reach for. And of these 3, 2 of them I recommend, 1 I don't. Glyphosate, this is a non-selective herbicide. Basically, whatever it touches, it will kill if it's a plant. Now, it has to be touched living plant cells. If the plant is dormant and you spray it on it, it won't do anything. It is absorbed through the leaves. It is absorbed through that cut stem tissue, and it will move and be systemic in the plant, and it will kill the roots. Now, the nice thing about glyphosate is it binds to soil particles, and it does not move in the environment. And so it stays where you spray it. There's no soil activity. Triclopyr is another one that we often see recommended. Now, this one is selective. So it will control broadleaves, which is pretty much everything we're dealing with today, but it will not control or kill grasses. Operates much in the same way as glyphosate, has to be absorbed through a living plant cell, which would be a leaf or the cut stem, and it moves into the plant. Now, this one does have limited soil activity, but not as much as the third one, which I do not typically recommend. The third one, the active ingredient is picloram. Picloram is the active ingredient, and I think most people know this brand name, which is Tordon. I try to steer folks away from the use of picloram, and because it's very good at killing broadleaves. Again, like triclopyr, it doesn't kill grasses, but any broadleaf plant it will kill. And it is absorbed by foliage, stems, and roots, and it moves throughout the plant. So it's systemic, so it'll kill the top, it'll kill the roots, it'll kill all of it. But the thing with picloram is it is soluble, which means it doesn't bind to soil, it binds to water, and it moves in the soil. And that's one of the reasons why I really try to steer folks away from picloram, is because it does not stay where you spray it, and it can have a long residual. And I have seen lots and lots of desirable plants in the home landscape or in a forested wooded area that have been killed because someone was trying to control another plant nearby, and that product moved in the soil and it was absorbed by the adjacent desirable plant. So I try to steer folks away from picloram, so not typically recommended. But glyphosate, triclopyr, those are the ones that you will usually see in terms of an Illinois Extension recommendation. Follow that label, please read it. Even if you're very comfortable with using pesticides, you have to read those labels. Formulations change, uses change, things change. Read those labels every single time. Timing is important, weather conditions, the rate. A lot of times I will hear, if a little's good, a lot must be better. That's not the case. That's not true. These companies have studied the exact quantity of amount to kill that plant. And so they want to make sure that you're utilizing that, and they have been evaluated by the EPA. So more is not better, and more can actually cause damage. And please wear proper PE. Read those labels. It will tell you what to do. This is an invaluable resource. that talks about managing invasive plants, not only the ones that are listed as legally invasive, but also the ones that are species of concern, like Callery pear, burning bush, Japanese barberry, so on and so forth. This is free. Just go to the Mr. Google Pants, type in management of invasive plants, Illinois. You can download this PDF. Many Illinois Extension offices have print copies. I have a box of these here in Macomb. If you're nearby, I am happy to send you some, or stop by and you can pick one up. This is a great resource that tells you not only chemicals, but mechanical, biological, cultural ways to control these invasive plants and species of concern. Finally, the so what. I have given this presentation many times, and oftentimes, and mostly these are comments I get online, but people will say, so what? Explain exactly what plants are suffering here. Or aren't these non-native species providing food for birds? Don't they sequester carbon? They look beautiful. How's that not a good thing? Others say we need to expand our forests, and if a beautiful non-native tree can do that without harming other organisms, that's a very good thing, right? Others will say, I found one of these growing in my backyard. The fall colors are extraordinary. The spread's not that bad, so I'm not going to get rid of it. Maybe the spread's not that bad in your yard, but are you checking everyone's yard? Are you checking the woods? There's a lot to unpack here, but let's just do a simple quote from Rick Dark, who said, for me in my garden, the dominant ethic is to do good, and the corollary is to do no harm. Now, I think that's big, especially when we look at something like this. This is burning bush again that has escaped the woods near my home. And I think about the burning bush that I have in my yard. I realize, again, as I described, the burning bush serves a function in my yard, but there is a plan to get rid of it. And eventually it will be cut down. Because when you look at these leaves at the end of the season, a lot of our native trees, shrubs, perennials, they look pretty ragged. It's because insects eat them. And what eats insects? Everything else, but namely birds. And when we think about the amount of protein required to fledge a group of nestlings, that burning bush is not supplying that protein. So because we cannot support the insect populations, we can no longer support the bird populations. What eats birds? Well, a lot of things eat birds. A lot of things eat insects. And so there at that cornerstone of our food web or our food chain sits native plants as the primary energy source that drives our native ecosystems. And if we introduce a lot of these non-native species, we can't fledge this clutch of white-eyed vireos. Same is true with all bird species. They need protein to grow. So I think about these baby birds. I think about even the snakes that are predators of them, but they're still part of that food chain. The hawks that then come and eat those snakes. But I also think about the future generations of humans that will inhabit this space. And I think that is an important consideration, that I want to make sure that we have a natural landscape, a native landscape that they can grow up in, and they can observe those birds, they can observe those insects, those butterflies, the wildlife, and that can perpetuate through time. And I think that is our goal when it comes to managing some of these plants. And that's why I'm going to pull the burning bush out of my yard. That's the reason. Questions? Now's the time for asking. I will pause, take a quick drink of water. Here's my contact information. Again, I'm in Macomb, Illinois. This will be recorded and it will be posted at University of Illinois Extension Horticulture, our YouTube channel. And finally, if you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. Please go to go.illinois.edu/2023 invasives or scan this QR code